Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We have a last session in which we're going to report back from our parallel sessions, and also we'll have some real discussions as conclusion of today. Tom and I were working hard for session A and session B earlier for the past 2.5 hours. Fierce debate, from the bottom of the heart discussions, a lot of aspirations, and certainly also a lot of case studies and comparison as well. But once again, I repeat what Confucius said: to know what you know and what you don't know is the real knowledge. We have the real people in the know on the stage. That's why I want to leave the stage to the two of them. Valerie Hannon, who's the co-founder of Innovation Unit, and also Tony McKay, President and CEO of National Center for Education and the Economy. The floor is yours. Please.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it's falls to me to start off. I'm going to give a very brief, swift but excited synthesis of what happened in Group 2A, because I want to observe to begin with that I do want to pay tribute to the designers of this event. I thought it was a beautifully designed afternoon for us, because what was brought together was, first of all, an overview of some findings. It was said, you know, if you've got no data, you've just got opinions. So we had Nick Chambers from Education Employers, who was giving us some data about the benefits of employers being involved in careers education and employment education options generally, and on young people's attitudes. But then, on the back of that, on those data, we went through to having 3 perspectives from 3 groups of students, and each of these sessions were called Co-Creating the Future. So the first session was with students of 15, school-age students. The second was with students from higher education, and then the third was with students from technical and vocational education and training. And the session built really very interestingly, which I hope now to persuade you of. So starting with Nick Chambers, I think he had 2 or 3 major points, which I'll just pick up very quickly. First, the incredible benefits that ensue from having employers engaged with students of school age and thinking about their careers. Some of the broad benefits of those are the excitement that this generates, the broader horizons that it can open for young people, the way in which, and this is one I'm going to pause on, it challenges stereotypes. And Nick gave us some really quite shocking data about how early, I mean, I'm naive here, I'm starting to think at my grand old age that these old gender stereotypes were starting to break down. Not a bit of it. He showed us some videos of children 6 or 7 being asked to draw pictures of firefighters, surgeons, and fighter pilots. And guess who they drew? So all those sex stereotypes are alive and well and kicking. And they get in early and they stick. So one of the benefits of employers being involved is that those gender stereotypes can be broken down, and broken down in the best way possible by demonstrating it ain't so. The other kind of work that I think Education Employers NGO is doing is really getting a sense from young people themselves about their career aspirations. And what emerged for me from that was the chasm really between young people's aspirations and the realities of the labour market. Now, this is a theme that's going to reappear. I'm going to come back to it right at the end of what I have to say, but it's there in the data very clearly. And then finally, I think from OECD's point of view, particularly from the Education 2030 project, Education and Employers, that's the NGO, is gathering from young people their perspectives about what they want for their future. So if the ultimate purpose of education, and shouldn't we get clear about that, is creating the future we want, then the more narratives we have from young people about the contours of that, I think the better placed we are to design education to achieve it. So then we move into 3 sections, one with school students, one with higher education students, and one with TVET students. And this is, I think, is a very, very interesting continuum. So by far and away, the most discontented, the most highly critical of education systems were the school students. And I think you're pretty familiar with the critique, so I'll synthesize it in but a few words. Too many schools are exam factories. There's too much passivity. There's too much transmission from teachers. There's too much delivery mode. There's a lack of choice in what you study, how you study it, and what you do day by day. And there's too little learning with mobile devices. That's mobile devices. So there's technology in schools, but the young people did not feel that it was well exploited. What did they want? And again, I guess if I took a poll, you probably could guess. They want recognition of their emotions. They want recognition of their passions and their identities. They want education to be relational. They want to have good relationships with the people that they meet day in, day out, and they want respect. They're not finding much of it. And they want a way of expressing scope for the hope that they all had, because they were asked explicitly, do you have hope for the future? And yes, they do, but they're not finding the scope within their schooling experience to express that. Now, before I move on to the other two groups of students, I do want to observe that I felt that this was a homogeneous group of school students from schools who are in that mode. And I sat there thinking to myself, what if there had been students mixed up in the group who were from big picture learning schools, or high-tech high, or expeditionary learning, or Learn Life, who's represented here. These students would be telling a different story. And I think we need to hear that story alongside the critique, because what it shows is that it is possible to meet those demands, to still have rigorous and demanding academics, but to do far more beyond that in extremely satisfying ways. And all of those schools are modelling that practice. I think we're going to come on to that tomorrow, at least I hope we do, because the work of this group, this convening, must be looking to the future, not in a theoretical and abstract way, but picking up on the real-life examples which are doing fantastic work across the world and which can be replicated if we know how to find the right theory of change. So let me move to the slightly less critical group, which was the Co-Creating Future 2 from higher education. And this was an interesting group because they had had the opportunity at the New York University of Abu Dhabi to hack the curriculum. And what they did was to create a curriculum called Towards Global Learning. So their meditation really was on the possibilities of creating global citizens, of making real the notion of global competencies. And I just want to pick up on a few of the insights that struck me between the eyes. And by the way, I would have been happy to be taught by any one of them on that curriculum. They pointed out that empathy is not just a matter of insight into someone else's experiences, but it's actually, and I'll quote, seeing people as an extension of yourself. They thought that global citizenship did not entail a lack of local identity. If you become a citizen of the world, it does not mean you're a citizen of nowhere, and they understand how that can be played out. It is possible to teach coexistence. It's not something you're born with or a particular faculty. There is a set of experiences which can be designed which teach it. And yes, it's about perspective taking, as in the OECD's competence framework for global citizenship, but it's also about perspective seeking, going out of your way to seek out the perspectives of those who differ from you in multiple ways. They were very positive about the possibilities within higher education now of incorporating many different forms of technology and expanding the offer. So their institution certainly reaches beyond the confines of the institution itself and picks up on opportunities which are globally available on the net and exploits them. It does enable much more choice, much more voice. These students felt that they were finding themselves within that higher education experience. So all of that was extremely positive. But I will observe, as I move on to the next group, two things. One is that we concentrated, I guess rightly, on content and pedagogy. We didn't touch at all on the economics much. And so what got left out of that picture was two things. One, that many systems now are such that students are put off the very thought of higher education because of the debt burden. And they're asking themselves, is the debt worth it? But then what's the calculus? The debt being whatever it is, X $1,000 at the end of your experience, set against the career premium that you get in your salary uplift? Is that the calculus? Or is it something more? Is going to university not just about the career uplift in terms of your salary, but also a set of different, rather more intangible benefits? So there's one thing, the economics of the debt that's incurred. And then secondly, the idea that this can be overcome simply by better off universities offering scholarships through their endowments seems to me to be an insufficient answer. We surely need to be looking at something broader than that, and perhaps getting over the idea that higher education should be everybody's aspiration and that it's for everybody. It's not. Why should it be? And now we come to the third of our group, TVET, the Cinderella sector, which most people view as the second best option for those who can't hack it in higher education or whose teachers have written off. If you think that's a bunch of caricatures, our students actually talked about themselves in those terms, or some of them did. I mean, it's an outrage. These, as World Skills has said, skills matter. Skills change lives. They change the lives of people who acquire them, and they change the lives of people who have the luck to benefit from them, as we all do. You're sitting on chairs made by people with skills, and so on and so forth. So skills really matter, and it's a fantastic sector to enter. So I do think that if you were sitting in that group, in that session this afternoon, the happiest and the most inspiring students were those from the TVET sector. Why is that? What did they have to say? Well, they gave us their kind of life stories, which I won't go into here, but a number of things struck me. It was by luck that they found their passion so often. There was nothing systematic to help them find what it was that would really ignite the passion for learning. But in this case, they all found it. They now have multiple worldwide career opportunities and are making the most of it. And what struck me particularly was that having gone through the TVET experience, it turned them into lifelong learners. So we might hope for that for people coming out of school or out of higher education. It very often is not the case. But with these learners, they did turn up. So one of our students was going on to a master's, wanted to go back into academic education, but all the others were quite clear. They were in it forever because the skill base for their own field would be changing perpetually. It'd be changing by automation, be changing by the insertion of artificial intelligence, and they were going to keep up with it. And by the way, they loved doing so. So TVET has the capacity, more than the capacity, it's actually creating lifelong learners in the way that I think that we all aspire to. So out of that, it seems to me there's a model. Find your passion, enable people to find success in their learning, accredit it, and then set them free. And they will be lifelong learners. My finale, before I hand over to you, Tony, is this. We looked at schools, higher education, and TVET. And this whole conference is about the future of world education. And I think from this afternoon, it gives us an agenda of 3 parts. For schools, we've got a strong critique. We know what that looks like now, but we've also got some great solutions, and it's about time we started concentrating on the solutions and stop obsessing about the critique. The solution is there, partly in Education 2030 framework, fantastic piece of work that we can all learn from and draw upon, but also in some of the schools I've talked about who are in this room and doing great work around the world. In higher education, I think the agenda for the future of world education is the cost implications, the uneven access, and the assumption that it's for everybody when perhaps it is not. And finally, for TVET, for the future of world education, I think the agenda is this. It's to rescue it from its second-class status. It's to spotlight its successes and the satisfactions it confers on its students and show that it's not a dead end, very far from it. It's a door opener. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. And those who were in this very room will find resonance with quite a bit of what Valerie has reported. I'm going to try and attempt to capture 2.5 hours in 5 points, and forgive me for not referencing individuals. And I want you to know that if you're in the room and you listen to my account of this, if you feel as if you were somewhere else, then I want you to know that my account is really the way in which the conversation should have unfolded. So let me just say that, exactly right. So let me just say this. We had a group of young leaders actively engaged in both the learning business and the business of business. Okay, so they were sitting with leaders from both the education and the business sector, and they were interrogating each other courtesy of our moderator. And effectively what emerged was, in the same terms, I think, Valerie, that you've just given us a sense of the future, we were seeing what an adequate learning system of the future should look like, and I think we were starting to understand the nature of an emerging future workforce and indeed the future of work. So it was those perspectives that were brought together, and I found 5 things that I could pick up as being major outcomes of the conversation, the interrogation at times. The first is that, in the same terms that Valerie's just indicated, there is greater commonality amongst us now around the purposes and goals of education, or indeed learning. So we heard from a number of our colleagues the importance of being more human, of ensuring that empathy and cooperation and communication, the hallmarks of what makes us human, are at the heart of the purpose of our learning, to become, as we have said this morning, first-class human beings, not second-class robots. Second, we want to ensure that we experience both individual and collective well-being. And third, there was an emerging conversation about the need for us to be good local and global citizens in order to ensure the sustainability of this planet. Now, that's my first point, that in fact emerging from the conversation was a sense of, I think, commonality around the broader goals and purposes of learning that we asked for at the very start of today. Second, it became pretty clear that what we will require if we're going to fulfil those goals and those purposes, and I heard this from all panel members in one form or another, is a commitment to a learning life, exactly your point, Valerie. We have talked about lifelong learning in the past, but this has got a new intensity about it. This is learning a living. This is unlearning and relearning. This is certainly upskilling, but this is a serious commitment to the way in which we think about a learning system from birth through to the moment where, in fact, we're fully mature, which I think is a better way of describing death, quite frankly. So what I was hearing was, can you stop front-loading the expectations of learning into a K-12 system when you've got a lifetime to learn? And therefore, it's not the continuum we've had. It's a very different kind of continuum for ongoing learning. And so that needs to be a future-ready learning system for a future-ready workforce. And by the way, if we had more time, there were enough indications that people wanted to renegotiate, reconceptualise and indeed re-prosecute the nature of work itself. And we could have had more about that if we'd had time. Third, the environment in which our purpose and goals and what we now see as being the importance of constant learning, the environment in which we're operating, well, we were told it's global and local. It's formal and informal. And we could spend more time talking about the importance of the interface. And it's virtual and real. And if we don't understand that there's those multiple learning environments, then what is our capacity to unlearn and relearn for the purpose that we're talking about? Fourth, what is the adequacy of our current learning institutions to respond to those purposes, those goals, in a way in which we can encourage all people to continue to learn in multiple environments? And the answer was, the current learning institutions that we have are a little short of what we require. And so in exactly the same language that you've used, I think, Valerie, we brought to this perspective one that we would deliberately had put into sharp focus. That is the importance of a partnership between education and business. Now, we could have said education is everybody's business, and in fact many of the panel members talked about that. So it's not just a question about education and business. It's obviously about government, it's obviously about trade unions, it's obviously about the media, it's obviously about not-for-profits, social entrepreneurs, community groups. Everybody talked about that, but we sharpened the debate around the interface between education and business. And we said in schooling, however that might ultimately be defined, you would want to ensure that industry and business are in close relationship with schools so that young people are understanding the very nature of work and how it's changing. Second, we said the interface between schools and the tertiary sector is one where, in fact, currently, as you point out, the pathways that we have for young people are not helpful to meet their passions and their needs. And so we'll need to think very differently about the way in which those pathways are exercised. And we are saying that business can play a significant role in that interface between schooling and tertiary education. In fact, tertiary education now going on to the third interface between tertiary and if you like, within tertiary. Within tertiary, voc ed, higher education. Everybody is saying we have got to see that these things are not the old head-hand dichotomy. They are not the differential status. They are absolutely to be merged in ways that help us to understand the range of knowledge and skills that we require. And if it doesn't have an application in real world, you have to ask a serious question about your partnership within institutions, tertiary institutions, both higher education and vocational education, and business can be a brilliant connector in that space. So think about the trinity, if you like, of voc ed, of higher education and of business coming together. Then we had another category, and that was new providers. New providers coming into the marketplace who are offering quite different kinds of learning experiences. And indeed within business, establishing learning centres and institutes, including things like professional apprenticeships, that mean that in fact we've got effectively an emerging learning ecosystem. And we didn't really get the chance to explain what that might look like. But if we're going to be adequate to the kind of purposes, the multiple environments that we're talking about, and if we're going to seriously improve the interfaces between various stages or phases of a learning continuum, then it's pretty clear that we have to think about a healthy learning ecosystem. That's going to require governance. We got onto the role of government, but we didn't explore it fully. But we did make it clear that if we need increased resources in order to underpin this kind of learning society, it's going to have to be everybody contributing. This is not just going to come out of the taxpayer dollar. And then, 5, a new learning profession. We did not get the chance to seriously explore this, but it came out on many occasions that if we are going to be adequate to these challenges, a learning profession, and I'm using that language rather than an educated workforce, a learning profession that's more differentiated, that ensures that in fact we are working closely with allied professionals, is going to be absolutely essential to be able to deliver on this ambitious agenda. This is unlearning, relearning throughout the whole of your life, and this is actually going to be a huge challenge for us as we constantly upskill in a fourth industrial age. And so the whole conversation about AI and robotics and the way in which that's going to change the nature of work and how people think about work and what a future workforce looks like, this really will require a different kind of learning profession to support that kind of investment in our learning. So if we've got 2 minutes, I want to take a microphone to 4 people. And this is pretty much without them knowing what I'm going to ask them to say. So where's Dan? Dan Leeds, can you show me where you are? Oh, great. Okay, Dan, at the end of the conversation this afternoon, I thought, okay, a learning system that's fit for purpose, and there were 4 perspectives that I heard emerge in the conversation, and one was, what do we mean by a system?
So I think really what we meant by a system would be something that sort of is agreed to by all different perspectives in a coherent way that embraces the science of learning, which is what we've learned over the last 30 years about how people learn.
Thank you. And Eric, at one point when we were talking about a learning system that's going to be adequate to the ambition we have. You mightn't have used this language, but I thought it was, are we clear about the potential for even further exacerbation of winners and losers?
Well, what we saw from the morning presentation of Andreas is that every country faces a challenge of large gaps between socioeconomic status. Some do better than others, some do worse than others. But if we're really going to address that difference, we're going to have to pay attention to the learning profession and who the teachers are, and ensuring that the children in most need get high-quality teachers. And there are a variety of ways to do that that might differ by country, but there's no other answer that I know of from the research.
Okay, so Danny, let me put you on the spot. You opened the conversation, and at the moment you're operating a remarkable lab that I think in many ways is a signature of what some were saying is the new learning system. And that is startup mentality, that is an absolute commitment to entrepreneurship and enterprising behaviours. Is that the new lifeblood of the learning system?
That is a tough question to answer, because I would have to say yes and no. You need breadth and depth. I believe the entrepreneurial system offers breadth. I believe expertise offers depth, but I'm a little distracted because I realized that one of our young leaders, Origen, was not on any of the panels, and I think that was just a slight mistake. And so if you have a few moments, he's a brilliant leader and entrepreneur himself, if you could maybe direct a question to him if we have some time, I'd recommend that.
Well, Daddy, in a moment, but after I've asked you a question, you can take the microphone and do a quick interview. Okay? Right, so get ready to do that. But let me ask you this, because I thought there was a moment where, if we're talking about the lifeblood or the DNA of a new learning system, your focus upon building the strength of the connection between all of the players, and I know we put a particular focus on business and education, seemed to me to be the statement that evoked the most support, that this is a game now of cooperation, of partnership. But just explain what you meant by that.
Sure. So I guess a lot of the panelists spoke about how different entities and there are different stakeholders in the educational journey of all students. And like I think both of you also mentioned, the importance of formal and informal education. And so that collaboration is really important, and we always talk about it in vision. I guess the next conversation we should be having after this forum is how do we make that impactful? How do we create those connections? What platforms do we need? What platforms are missing for those collaborations to happen? Because you see it in every strategy, you see it in every vision, in every conference, but what is the practicality? How do we get that ball rolling?
Brilliant. Moderators and Valerie, have we got time for a quick interview? Right, Danny, you're on.
Well, I don't need to interview. I just wanted to give you the stage for just one moment, because I think it's very important that we hear from our African leaders if we are truly part of a World Education Forum. And so if you don't mind sharing just some of your insights from Rwanda? Yes, specifically. Oh, yes, what specifically? I'm not a very good moderator. So actually, in the conversation we had during lunch is that there are strengths and weaknesses within every country when it comes to education. So what specific strengths do you see in Rwanda, and what specific weaknesses do you think need to be addressed?
All right, thank you so much. My name is Origen Igiraneza from Rwanda. I run a company called Ogenius Private Limited, which has developed a solution called Ogenius Panda. It's a kind of interactive of teaching science like in more engaging and attractive way to people who actually not only don't have access to laboratory equipments, but again to people in rural areas that will need to learn and experiment things that normally get to from elite schools. So this is something that we've done, and we've got a chance that this year our solution has been selected by UN to be part of the most innovative solutions in the world, top 50, most innovative solutions that are advancing SDGs. This has happened during the UN General Assembly. Thank you, thank you. So coming back to your questions about the, I would call like opportunities that we have in our country. Number one is that we have a country that understands the dynamism and the kind of things that are needed to address problems of this century. I would say like the government itself has set a vision that the country should be a skill-based economy instead of other alternative. So building skills is one of the areas that the country is focusing on. Second is that when it comes to education itself, someone spoke about the budget. I would say like in Rwanda, one of the top things that are prioritized in a budget, actually education is among the top, like it's the second, if not the first, in Rwanda, that takes a big budget. And then when we look upon the technology itself, 84% of schools in Rwanda have access to computers, like in high school. And the government is planning, like next year, there will be a dedicated network to schools, just schools, with a high bandwidth connection that will allow people from all these areas to connect and learn. And by 2023, it will be completely digital. That's the target. So that's a kind of opportunity that we have that will inspire innovations and like attraction to even private sector to invest to people like us who are into creation of the content. But I would say like the challenge that we always face are kind of common to even other countries. I would say like number one, there is a kind of it's a growing country where we have a lot of people, a lot of kids that need to go to school, a lot of investment that needs to be done to ensure that they are getting the quality of education. That's something that we, as people and government and private sector, are still fighting to find a solution that can make many people acquire education, but not only the education, but the quality one. Because there is a problem of getting education, and there is a problem of getting the quality, the most needed education. The government has already tried to restructure kind of the curriculum. There was a curriculum, now they introduced one called competence-based curriculum, which requires students to find out 80% of what they are learning, and then 20% from teachers, which means it's more participatory. You learn by discovering. And from our side as a company, I would say like through the solution that we've developed, by the way, it has even helped students to develop the academic performance by 10% as an increment, as opposed to before using the solution. But what we do today is like figuring out the way people would relate what they are learning to the actual real life. And second, education shouldn't be like a acquisition of degrees, rather improving lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was inspiring and immensely important to hear. In closing tonight, I would like to try to make a bridge for our agenda for tomorrow and just make a couple of remarks which occur to me anyhow as someone reflecting on all of this, which is the gains that are being made in those emerging nations and developing countries. They will be set back 10, 15, 20 years by the impact potentially of the climate emergency in the coming 10 and 15 years. And so, Tony, when you say today, we're pretty clear what the purposes of education are now. I don't want to slide over it quite that easily, because I'm not so sure, actually, that we do have a genuine consensus about what the future of education's purposes needs to be. For me, it's absolutely right that the partnership with business here has been privileged, not because I want to fall back, God forbid, on an economistic notion of what the purposes of education should be, but because business is changing so much, because the great businesses now are about the 3 Ps. They're about the planet, they're about people, and they're about profit. And so because businesses are changing, the best ones, to that perspective, it's right that they're absolutely within this conversation. But I want to say that as for the future of education, if we're serious about that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we have to be asking whether the well-being agenda, or even talking about vaguely the future we want in terms of human outcomes, is the right starting point. Because if we're going to unlearn something, I want to suggest to you that what we need to unlearn is our relationship with our environment. We have to unlearn the idea that it's there, as Aristotle thought, to serve us, but rather we are a part of nature, and we must relearn that in very fundamental ways if we are not to undergo the most appalling outcomes of the climate emergency. And I say again, right now, it's the poor and developing countries who are feeling it, and they will feel it even more. So I think that when we talk about the purposes of education, let's make sure we're clear about the real future we face and the breadth of vision we need to embrace something which is truly inspiring. It's the thing that's getting the kids out on the street, and they know why. So with that thought, I would like to say thank you all for this afternoon. We look forward to joining you tomorrow, and hand over to Tom.
Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Valerie. That's a fantastic place to end today's conversation. And thank you all for your contributions during the day, for your patience and for your creativity and for your camaraderie, because this is very much, as we've heard, a shared effort. And we've seen today the world's first headstand at an OECD conference, and we've learned a huge amount from each other. We've learned why Jack Ma didn't become a chemist. We've learned how urgent it is that we do change the way that we learn in the future. And I think we've also learned, and this afternoon has reminded us very compellingly of this, that it will be young people who will drive that change. And I think they will do a better job of it than the rest of us. And so thank you particularly to the young people who have spoken so powerfully this afternoon. This is a daunting challenge, as we've heard, but in a world of all of this daring and innovation and compassion, it's surely not beyond us. So no pressure, but please go out and continue to change the world. And we'll start again with that change at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll try and start nice and prompt. We've got a lot to get through in the morning. But for now, please give yourselves a huge round of applause for a fantastic day's work. And everyone is invited to a reception in the chateau now. There will be teams of people outside to point you in the right direction. See you there.